Hi everyone and welcome to the latest edition of You and My Boro with myself, Scott Wilson and Dom Shaw from the Northern Echo. 45 down, 1 to go, and it's a big one. We might not feel like we've got the joys of spring in our step, but it is a big old game, and we will certainly get round to all things Coventry. And Saturday lunchtime in a sec. We will have a look back at the weekend. I'm afraid we're going to have to do that. I know it's, I'm sure, going to throw up many of the things that we've been talked about. And then we'll probably chat Jonny Howson, and we might well chat Michael Carrick before the end as well. You well, Dom?
I'm all right, mate. I'm all right. How are you? Beauty morning.
I'm very well. Right, okay. So, Saturday, the Riverside Stadium. It's all set up. Boro need the win. Norwich, nothing to play for. Jack Wilshere's first game. What can go wrong? Well, I guess it didn't go completely wrong, but not good enough. Not good enough.
No, and I mean, the bottom line is Boro went into the game with a top six finish in their hands and came out of the game with it no longer in their hands, having had the result that they needed in the early kickoff. And I think the manner of that result as well, like Luton scoring in the last minute, you hoped. We were sat in the press room at the Riverside at the time, and you heard the roar in the concourse. I popped out to the concourse like 10, 15 minutes earlier, and it was heaving in there, everyone watching the game. Yeah. And when Luton scored, obviously there was the inevitable lift, and you hoped it would lift the players, but they didn't play like it did. Like the most damning thing, really, and the most disappointing thing, I think, again, was similar to the second half at Sheffield Wednesday. You just didn't get the feel that there was so much at stake. It felt like a dead rubber. And like that's not right, is it, at this stage of the season?
No, and I think that's an interesting thing you touch on there, because, you know, countless of these videos we've talked about, you know, Boro bingo, if you like, Carrick's changes, not being able to turn the tide of a game, not scoring enough goals, silly goals they've given away. What we probably haven't touched on is really just how flat it's felt, I feel, in the whole of, well, to a degree, the whole of the season, but certainly the second half of the season, when all the way through it's kind of been there for Boro. And yet, you know, largely because performances haven't warranted it, but the whole thing just felt flat. And like you say, the lack of intensity in Boro's play in this last month, when really everything's been on the line for them, is just another kind of stick to beat Carrick and the players with, isn't it? Like, you know, if nothing else, they should be going into these games and you know, again, cliche a little, but leaving everything out there, giving absolutely everything to try and get the result. Now, you know, I sometimes think it's easy to label for fans to throw at players, well, they don't care enough, blah, blah, blah. But if nothing else, this is a Boro team that doesn't seem to have grasped the kind of magnitude of these games and what might be just around the corner if they could only sort themselves out.
Well, one of the guys who covers Norwich, who was obviously there at the weekend, at half-time, he tweeted and obviously touched on the Norwich performance, but then he said Boro are strangely inhibited given the stakes. And I thought that summed it up, really. And we've talked again and again, haven't we, about if a neutral was sat in the stadium, they would not grasp, they would not understand that Boro were in the position they were in, and there's evidence of it. It felt going in like this is you've been given another chance after the slip up at Sheffield Wednesday. Everything has gone your way, and it did again before the game on Saturday with Luton beating Coventry. It did again last night, really, with Leeds thumping Bristol City. I mean, we'll get to all of the permutations. I just can't see Bristol City not getting something out of that game against Preston. So I don't think last night really mattered. But everything has been there for them, hasn't it? Other teams faltering. The fixture list, Boro could not have had a better run of the last few games. To get 1 point out of Sheffield Wednesday away and Norwich at home at this stage of the season, and to do it in the manner they have, I just think that's so disappointing. And that's why I think what you were saying there about the flat feel, the lap of appreciation was that. It was a lap of appreciation. It wasn't a lap of honour. The majority of fans had gone.
And how much of that then of what we talk about, the fact that it's kind of felt flat, the fact that it's been so one-dimensional, the fact that the intensity just hasn't really been there. How much of that is down to players, or how much of it is down to Carrick's kind of style and the fact that he wants his team to dominate possession, keep the ball, risk averse to a large extent, tactically very, very rigid. How much of the way that he wants his team and sets his team up makes it hard for them to, if you like, flick a switch and suddenly play in a more intense, more aggressive, more everything's on the line style?
I think it's more the latter. I don't think, for all the faults we've talked about this season and all the issues that Boro haven't been able to get to the bottom of, just from what we see and from what the players say, and I've been to a couple of those events recently where obviously Michael Carrick and the players have met the fans. You have players in that dressing room who truly know what it means. Dale Fry, Hayden Hackney. Hayden Hackney has talked about, this is my dream to play for my hometown club, to go up for my hometown club would be my dream. Dale Fry's talked about it. Jonny Howson has said on countless occasions, if I leave Boro having not won promotion to the Premier League, I'll have failed. I don't think that's the case for 1 minute, by the way. He's probably a modern day legend in Boro terms, isn't he? But that's what he says. So I don't think there's a lack of desire. But when you look at the three players who Carrick started behind Tommy Conway on Saturday, Morgan Whittaker on the right, Kelechi Iheanacho's 10, Finn Azaz on the left. Like, where's the pace and the power and the urgency there? They're all, for all, clearly Iheanacho's had a rough old time these last few months. They're all wonderfully talented footballers. They're all gifted footballers, aren't they? They've all got a lovely touch when they're at the best and fit. But you want a bit more oomph, don't you? That's why I think I'd seen plenty of fans calling for like a Bergzorg, because at least he's a direct runner. At least he might put you on the front foot. That Carrick talks again and again, doesn't he? Or has done over the course of the last few years about a connection between players. It's important that players build a connection, partnerships on the pitch. So you had like McGree and Giles in the first season, Akpom and Archer. Yeah. Going back to Wilder, when you had that three of Jones, Crooks, and Tav, I think it was, on the Dyke Steele on the right side. Well, that front three on Saturday, no connection. There was like no connection, no understanding. It looked like three attacking players who'd been plonked on the pitch. And Hackney and Morris, who I thought played like relatively well on Saturday, tried to drive Boro forward. There was just no movement in front of them. I think it's more the players who were out there, the type of players they are, and the way Michael Carrick asks them to play.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think some of that then brings us back to the kind of tactical rigidity that, I know it's difficult. I know if Michael Carrick's set his team up a certain way, he's not going to all of a sudden rip all that up for the last two games of the season. I kind of understand that. But it does feel like he's ended up with a squad that isn't massively suited to the way that he wants to play. And I think both of us could come up with alternative formations that it feels like might get the better out of some of the players that are currently playing. And yet, frustratingly, there's not a cat in hell's chance that we're going to see it, because no matter who's available, no matter what's on the line, Boro at Coventry at the weekend will set up 4-2-3-1. They'll do all the same things they've been doing so far this season, and Carrick will just hope that's good enough to get a result. Well, we'll get to that game in a minute, but the evidence of certainly the last month suggests there is a compelling case to try something different.
And when you were saying there about the flat feeling, why do you think that is? What do you think are the contributing factors there then that have led to that?
Well, I think it's because off the pitch, at no point have Boro fans truly believed that this was on. For all that we've constantly said they're in and amongst it, the results since Christmas have been nowhere near good enough to suggest that this is a Boro team that's capable of stringing together the 3-4 wins in a row that they needed. Now, they've yet somehow still managed to keep themselves right in it, and that's largely, as we've been saying numerous times, because everybody else around them has been every bit as wobbly and every bit as poor, really. But I think off the pitch, it's because there's never been that moment where you've thought, right, this is absolutely on. I largely agree with you that on the pitch, I think it's because Carrick sets his team up to play in such a rigid way that it just doesn't lend itself to changes in tempo and impetus within a game that Boro have needed to change, the narrative, if you like, to change the way they've been playing, to pull results out the fire. It's so predictable. It's so rigid that I think that has become a real problem.
You mentioned there the form since in the second half of the season, really. Well, I looked at the weekend. In the league table since the midpoint of the season, so in the last 22 games, Boro are 12th, below Hull, who might well go down, Swansea, who they've picked up, but they've been in the bottom half of the table all season, Oxford, and Portsmouth. They've lost 10. They've lost 10 of the last 22 games. Like that is clearly the 12th. That's just mid-table championship fodder, isn't it? Like the inconsistency, the capability, but the fact that we only see it in fits and starts, the issues that they haven't been able to get the bottom of, it's all just mid-table fodder, isn't it?
And I think that's in some respects, though, what you say there, the flashes we've seen, I think that is why it's so frustrating, because I still think if you put this Boro squad up against the Hull squad, the Swansea squad, even the Millwall and Blackburn squads, it is better. It is better. And that's why, ultimately, at the end of this season, some serious questions, even if Boro scramble into it now, are going to have to be asked about Michael Carrick and what's gone on there this season, because I still maintain that this Middlesbrough squad is more than good enough to be in the top 6 in this championship. I just think man for man, player for player, that, it is a top 6 squad. Now, yes, there's been injuries. Yes, Latalath was sold. Yes, losing Ben Doak was obviously a massive, massive blow. Cast aside all of that, I still think when at the minute you're going in the last day of the season below that Blackburn and all the problems there and the squad they've got, behind Millwall, the horrendous start they had and the limitations within that squad, it's not good enough. And yet, as we're going to get to in a minute, they do still have a chance. Before we do that, just before we go into the permutations, one thing I did want to ask you about on the last day, and we've written about it in the paper today and on the website this morning, if you haven't seen it. What's your reading on Jonny Howson? Did you think that was a good buy when he was on the pitch at the end with his family, or as the crowd were demanding, are we going to have one more year?
My instinct there, sitting there on Saturday, full time, the scenes, he got a picture with his family on the pitch. He was the last of the players off the pitch and was waving. My instinct was that he might decide that that's it. Yeah. But then I have thought that before. And I remember sitting with Jonny Howson earlier this year, and he's always a brilliant interview, Howson, isn't he? Because he thinks about every single answer to the point where there'll often be a 4, 5, 6 second silence after you've asked the question while he considers what he's going to say. When we'd done that interview, I'd asked him about, he always kind of apologized. It feels like every time we've interviewed him,
we've been asking him about 5 years.
Yeah. And I'd asked him then about the retirement issue and whether he's about playing on. And his answer that day made me think he was going to retire, made me think he was not going to continue playing at the end of the season, to the point where at the end of the interview, I said to him when we'd finished, you're not going to announce your retirement. Like, you're not going to announce it in the next week or so, are you? You're not going to make me look daft if I write this and say that you're good. And he said, no. I know. At this point, he'd obviously had his injury struggles. And he said, no, I'm not. But it made me think then, well, is he wondering on the back of his first half of the season whether this is going to be the time? But then, since then, he's come back in and played like prime Woodgate in the last few weeks at the heart of the defence. He has been so important over recent weeks, to the point where you had 3 central defenders on the bench on Saturday and on Monday because Howson kept his place in the team. So my kind of gut feeling was that might be it, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if I was wrong. What do you think?
Well, I mean, okay, if Boro get promoted, that's a very different situation that the club are in. But let's work on the assumption that they don't get promoted. I think Boro offer him another year. I think if Boro are in the Championship next season, yes, it's not the same Jonny Howson. Yes, injuries are becoming more and more of an issue. But I still think that Boro would offer him another year. It comes down to then, as you say, Howson, and he is a very proud fella. He's a very kind of put the club first fella as well. And he has been all the way through his career. So I think he would be weighing up, do I want to be kind of scuttling around in the shadows, barely getting a game, battling against a body that's at least starting to creak for the next 12 months? Or do I go out on my own terms? Do I, go out on a bit of a high? I've had a great end of the season. Because what I don't think he'd want to do is stay on for another 12 months, have horrendous injury problems, make 3 substitute appearances and kind of go out with a whimper in 12 months' time. So, yeah, I'd be swaying more towards that this might be the year, but I wouldn't absolutely nail my colours to mast on it. And like you say, I think Boro would want to keep him, don't you? If Jonny Howson says, I want to play on, Boro offer him another year, don't they?
Well, for me, if you wanted to change the defence at the weekend and you wanted to bring in, obviously Vandenberg was injured, we didn't know that, but before we knew that was the case, if you wanted to bring in Fry next to Vandenberg, I don't think you'd have dropped Howson. I think you'd have pushed Howson forward into midfield and probably pushed Hackney forward to play 10. So for a game of that importance, for Howson still to be an absolute must starter tells you everything, doesn't it? Yeah. Even when you've signed Aidan Morris, who was the succession plan, and he's had a really, really good first season, brilliant signing, and yet still, even when he's not been playing in his regular position, he's still been brilliant. And there was a couple of moments. There was a couple of moments where he got caught out on Saturday, but he was still one of Boro's better players again. And he has been, we won't get into it because regardless of whether he stays or goes, we'll obviously do a pod purely on Jonny Howson. I'm sure Mark Drury will want to get involved and do that with us because he loves him to bits. But what a signing. What a signing he's been. When you think of who he came in with in that summer and how a lot of those signings turned out. Just a couple of things before we get on to Coventry. We talked about signings there. Ben Doak. Doak was at the Riverside on Saturday. And to say his farewells, was obviously on the pitch afterwards and then posted on social media afterwards to say not the way he wanted it to end, but we'll always be grateful sort of stuff. What a signing he's been and how sorely he's been missed in the second half of the season.
Yeah, and to be fair, you kind of gloss over that a little bit, and I think that is a big mitigating factor. When we eventually rake through the ashes of the season and pass judgment on the squad and on Carrick and on recruitment and on everything, Ben Doak was probably the best player in the Championship in the first half of the season, certainly in the top 3 or 4. And he's been ripped out of the Boro team. And yes, all right, there were signings in January. Whittaker came in, hasn't really worked. But even for, even if whatever else, losing Doak was a huge, huge blow for Boro. Massive disappointment for him because, he was riding the crest of a wave, wasn't he? He was playing for Scotland. He was being, national writers would pontificating about which Premier League club he'd end up going to this summer. Was he the long-term replacement for Salah when it looked like Salah might not sign a contract at Liverpool? All of that. So it's a blow for him, but he's a young lad. He'll bounce back from that. Every player has these in his career. That's not going to hold him back. It's held Boro back. But what it does show is the continued importance of those Premier League loans, and the fact that I think Liverpool have massively liked the way that Boro dealt with Doak and helped him progress in the first half of the season. And then also, I think the way that the two clubs have worked together to deal with the injury. Let's be honest, Liverpool very much calling the shots. I think you'd like to hope that will play in Boro's favour if A, they want to go back to Liverpool to get a player, but B, really, if they want to go to any of the top Premier League teams to get a player. The fact that Doak has been such a success has got to help them. And it just reinforces the fact that if you get a couple of those types of signings right, can make or break your season in the Championship.
100%. And when you look back at Boro's most successful seasons, in the Championship in recent years, Premier League loanees have been game changers, haven't they? Doak, Patrick Bamford, Gaston Ramirez, all game changing signings, without which you probably wouldn't have got the position you were in.
Archer, that season.
Yeah, Archer and that. I think, well, there are countless examples in that season.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say though, because when had Doak stayed fit for the entirety of the season, I don't dispute Boro, or I don't think you can dispute that Boro would have been at least 1 or 2 points better off, because he's a match winner, he's a game changer. The only thing I would say is the kind of slide had set in for Boro before Doak's injury. I was looking back over the weekend, and Boro only won 2 of their 8 games prior to Doak's last game. And that included defeats at Preston and Portsmouth and draws with Cardiff, Plymouth, and that Sheffield Wednesday draw. So for all, Boro would have been a better team in the second half of the season if Doak was fit. I think it's too simplistic to say that in itself has cost Boro in the second half of the season.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a factor, but you can't lay everything at the door of Ben Doak getting injured. But I agree with you. That said, I still think there'll be games in the second half of the season where Doak would pull a goal out the fire, he scared opposition. That was the other thing. He made opponents change the way that they were setting up and defending because they knew that he was such a threat. And so, straight away that changes potentially the dynamics of some of the games that Boro have been going into when they haven't been able to break teams down and they haven't been able to turn possession into points and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I'm with you. He would have made a difference. He would have made a positive difference in the second half of the season. Whether it would have been enough to get Boro over the line if they're going to miss out at the weekend, we will never know, but he would have improved them.
It's interesting you say that, because and you said it earlier in this pod about the predictable nature of Boro's attack, and Ben Doak was anything but predictable, wasn't he? But Jack Wilshere at the weekend said, he was really good afterwards, and he said, Michael plays in a certain way, and he's really clear with that. The players, our players, Norwich's players, have clarity, and we were prepared for what we thought. But that is a polite way of saying that we're predictable and we were right.
And in fairness, he's not the only opposition manager that's made very similar type of comments, is he? I'm with you. I think if you're a data analyst putting together a file for Boro for a team that they're going to be playing against, Coventry say at the weekend, I don't think you're worried that when the team actually comes out on the day and the formation and how Boro are set up and what they're going to do, you might be made to look a fool. I think you're pretty confident that exactly what you put in that dossier for how Boro are going to line up and how they're going to play is exactly the way things are going to pan out.
Right, Owen, they're running across the bottom. We'll just say before we start here, we're going to do a brief vid pod at the back end of the week on Coventry specifically, with hopefully someone from the Coventry end. So we won't get into the ins and outs of the strengths and weaknesses of Coventry.
Yeah.
But obviously we have to have a look at the fixtures. Bristol City, who lost at Leeds last night and are still on 67 points, play Preston at home. Coventry, who are on 66 points in 6th, obviously play Boro at home. Millwall, 66 points in 7th, are away to Burnley. Blackburn, remarkably above Boro now. God, you think of the shambolic state they were in at Ewood at the start of April. They're 8th on 65 points. Sheffield United away. Boro 9th, 64 points. Coventry away, obviously. What do we reckon?
Well, what I reckon is, I'm not sure Boro could have asked for a better lot of fixtures for what they need. Now, I think Bristol City, like you, I think they're the ones who are probably a little bit out of it. They've got the cushion anyway. Preston need a result. Preston are in banging trouble, but they're the team who have slid into trouble on a disastrous run with no kind of form or momentum whatsoever. Bristol City have been good at Ashton Gate all season. Yes, they got a bit of they were played off the pitch at Ellen Road last night, but I don't think that's a disgrace against this Leeds team, and they were certainly on it last night, Leeds. So I think Bristol City win, and I think Bristol City finish 5th and will play Sunderland in the playoffs. So let's almost take Bristol City out of it. So it then comes down to, A, can Boro beat Coventry? B, will Millwall and Blackburn slip up in their games? I think the answer to B is yes. I think Millwall will lose at Burnley because Burnley are going for the title. It's their last home game. It's their promotion party. Millwall, we all know, way better at the Den than they've been away from home anyway. That feels like a game that it's really hard to see Millwall getting what they need from that game. By the same token, I can't see Blackburn winning at Sheffield United. Now, I know Sheffield United, to a certain extent, have nothing to play for. But they've bounced back pretty well, haven't they, since it became obvious that they weren't going up automatically. Again, it's their last home game of the regular season. I still think Wilder will go strong and will want his team to, we've seen Labris at Sunderland playing a shadow team for the best part of a month. Well, A, that's not on the last day of the season. And B, I just don't think that's Chris Wilder in any way, shape or form. So I think they win that game. So I think we're left in a scenario where if Boro win, I think they finish in the top 6. I just don't think they'll win a Coventry. Here's the long-winded way around. We've danced around it for long enough. I don't think Boro win at Coventry on Saturday. I'm sorry, I just don't. I think, yes, Coventry are having their wobble. It looked like 4 or 5 games ago they were home and hosed. They need the result now, don't they? So there will be nerves in that stadium. Don't get me wrong. And if Boro can exploit that, then maybe. But Boro will be a bag of nerves as well, won't they? You know what I mean? I really, really hope I'm wrong. But I just think that Coventry will have too much on a day that will be all about them getting over the line. You know what I mean? I think Coventry win the game. What about you?
If Boro needed a draw, then,
Yeah.
then I think you could make the case that then Coventry would have to win the game. Coventry would have to go at Boro. That would maybe play into Boro's hands a little bit. I'm with you. I think Bristol City will beat Preston. I've seen Bristol City at home a couple of times this season. I was there for the recent home game against Sunderland, and although it was nervy early on, the place was absolutely bouncing once they got in front. I think Bristol City are a far better team than Preston. I think Bristol City will get through. I don't think Millwall will win at Burnley, which they need to do. I don't think Blackburn will get anything at Sheffield United. I can't believe Blackburn are back in the picture.
Yeah.
Guy Bailey on Bluesky this morning made the point to me. I hadn't even thought of this. He said, I'd make Blackburn favourites based on the fact that if Sheffield United want to play them, they can put out their kids, take it easy, and say, we'll see you next week. Well, I hadn't even thought of that. But
yeah.
like you, I don't think that's Wilder.
I don't think that's Wilder. Nah, I don't think that's Wilder.
So I think Sheffield United, I think Blackburn failed to win at Bramall Lane. So again, it comes down to, can Boro win at Coventry? Have they got it in them to win at Coventry? Well, I think what you'd have to say is on the evidence of the second half of the season, everything we've talked about there, on the evidence of the last week and the performances in the second half against Sheffield Wednesday and Norwich, you'd say no. I don't think they can. I don't think they have got it in them. But then Michael Carrick, after the game on Saturday, it was really downbeat, actually. But he said, we'll lift them. It's a cup final now. We know what's at stake.
Yeah.
So can they prove us wrong? Well, you said there, the frustration is we know what this team is capable of. So can we see it? Can we see it on the biggest stage?
That's it, because you keep coming back to, there is a performance in this team, or at least there should be. There should be a performance in this team. And we have seen flashes of it. A performance is one thing. It's the character and the grittiness and the steeliness that they're probably going to need at some stage in this game that will be the worry for me. Now, it's going to be a fascinating afternoon because, the mood in that state, clearly if Coventry Boro is 0-0 and all of a sudden Millwall are 2 up, then the dynamic of the game completely changes then, because all of a sudden, Coventry are out of the top 6. They're going to have to go and the game maybe opens up. If Coventry know straight away that any kind of result gets them in, then they probably approach things differently. So the dynamic of what Coventry need and how they approach the game will be interesting. But I guess if you're Lampard, you just say, look, get out there, get a goal ahead, get a couple of goals ahead, and then it's utterly immaterial. Anything that's going on anywhere else, anything that's happening with Boro, whatever, that's obviously the ideal from the Coventry point of view. I think if you're Carrick, I guess you say, right, okay, we need to win this game. Now, I think probably for Boro, the first 10, 15 minutes, it's just about digging in and getting through it, get into the game, don't go a goal behind. Boro have 90 minutes to win this game if they can keep Coventry out. So I don't for 1 minute think, well, it's not Carrick style anyway, is it? We're not going to see a massive change in what they do. But for once, I think it's probably, what you don't want to go is go absolute hell for leather early on and put yourself out of it before you've even got into the game. So I could imagine it being a fairly cagey opening. It's when Coventry then start getting on top, which, clearly there will be periods where they are. What's Boro's response going to be then? And that's where my worries are.
And I have, clearly here I'm trying to talk myself into it, but I have heard and read managers and players in the past say, like in a final day game, it's better to know exactly it's better to know you need to win rather than have the almost kind of confusion in your mind as to how do you set up? Do you play for a draw? Is this good enough? But so that, and I can't say that plays into Boro's hands. It doesn't, but there is that factor. But then the other thing is, just take this game in isolation. Would you back Boro to win at Coventry on any other week of the season? Well, when you look at the table this season and the teams Boro have played, obviously above them, away from home, lost at Leeds, draw at Burnley, lost at Sheffield United, lost at Sunderland, lost at Bristol City, lost at Millwall. They've got to win at Blackburn, obviously. The evidence of the recent weeks, the evidence of the season suggests that Boro can't and won't go there and get the win they need. You've just got to hope. You've just got to hope they prove us wrong.
And I don't want to stay doom and gloomy, but when was the last time in your mind that Boro played well? Played well again. Now they played well at Blackburn, and you have to say that Blackburn. Because I was going to say, when was the last time they played well against a half-decent team? It didn't feel on that night that Blackburn were a half-decent team, but actually they are. So I guess that's the one, isn't it? If they can go and do what they did at Ewood Park, that would probably be good enough.
Yeah, I mean, Blackburn were that bad that night. And I look here at Stoke. Well, Stoke were awful that night. So then you're going back. Sheffield Wednesday for half an hour, Boro were absolutely unplayable. But then obviously we know what followed.
Came after that.
Yeah, and then you're probably going back to that spell of Oxford, Luton, and QPR, and then Norwich away, Boro were unplayable. But we know what happened there. Sheffield United home, best result of the season, maybe the best performance.
Yeah,
in terms of who you've beaten.
And to be fair. A game that had a little bit of I don't want to say a cup final feel, but felt like a big game between two teams where there was a lot at stake. And Boro rose to that. So maybe if we cling into something, that is it's a stretch, isn't it? Let's be honest, it's a stretch. But yeah, I mean that's the kind of performance they're gonna need, aren't they? Yeah. I think if Boro win this game, they probably win it 1-0. And it becomes a real tight, edgy game. Coventry aren't really sure what they need at various points of the afternoon. Coventry aren't really in a rhythm. Boro dig in. It's a game of few chances. They win it 1-0. I think if it's an open end-to-end game, I think Coventry will have too much for them. I think that's where Boro will potentially kind of fall apart and concede 2 goals, 3 goals in gluts like we've seen and get themselves out of the game. I think if Boro win it, it's probably 1-0.
Imagine if they got in now. After all the last few weeks.
Well, listen, if they get in now, they will have answered a lot of the questions that we've been thrown at them. You would have to say that.
In one 90-minute game.
In one 90-minute game, yeah. Yes, strange things can happen. Maybe Coventry will have a player send off and that'll change the game. But all things being equal, if this Boro team go to Coventry, beat them, and get in, then I think, you know, all of us, certainly us two, and plenty of fans will have to hold their hands up and say, well, all right, you know, I didn't see that coming. And yes, you've still got to make it worthwhile by actually doing something in the playoffs. Because let's be honest, there's not much point getting in the playoffs if you're going to get absolutely hammered in the semi-finals off Sheffield United. So, okay. But if they're able to go there, show the character that's going to be needed, show the quality that's going to be needed, and beat Coventry in both teams' biggest game of the season, then fair play to them. You know, that will answer a lot of the questions and a lot of the criticisms that are being levelled at the players, at Carrick, at the coaches, at the squad, everything.
Well, we'll be back at the back end of this week, and we won't chunt on for as long as we have here, but we'll have a mini preview ahead of the Coventry game with some insight from the Coventry side as well, which I think will be helpful because they've stuttered over the line. This is not the Coventry. This is not the Coventry that it was a month or so ago. So we'll get that insight at the back end of the week ahead of the game, and we'll have a proper preview specifically of the game then. But thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Top rate, and give us a review on your podcast platforms if you haven't already. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week to look ahead. We'll be back later this week to look ahead.
We'll be back next week to look ahead
next week we'll have the Wembley Hotels booked if that lasts 5 minutes.
It's a playoff semi-final special. It's Chris Wilder. Get Chris Wilder on the phone.
Manager of both former sides, Neil Warnock, special guest.
Yeah. EFL doyen and Neil Warnock after the other night.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, we'll be back later this week to look ahead to that Coventry game. And you are my Boro. Take care. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.